Well, welcome back. Seed and Light International wants to try a new set of videos based upon the 90-day garden with the idea that we truly don't know about global warming or global cooling or just bad weather. And we may be going into a period of time in which we have extremely unsettled weather. And Phil and I have, for the last 3 years really, tried to develop a concept of how can we grow, what can we find that would produce substantial amounts of quality food within a 90-day bracket, which those of you in the northern tier of the United States, that is about your growing season, and so you already have a lot of different seeds and such that might grow there. But here in the Southwest and in many parts of the world, 90 days is a very, we have 140 days here, but many years recently we've had difficult years to grow. And I'm going to mention the fact that during a time of warming, where we have extreme warm summers, we may be able to grow greens very well early in the season, but then we hit that June and July, which dumps down, well, the temperature goes up and no rain, and so it's very difficult to grow in that June and July, and then hopefully in August the rains will start again. So we've tried to find ways of how do we handle that particular situation. On the other hand, in extremely cold years where you have a very late spring and sometimes even a very early fall, your days can get cut back quite a bit. So Phil, thank you for being here and helping us here today.
Thanks for having me.
One of the big things is, can you grow enough food in the urban environment in 90 days to make a significant impact on the food that you eat? Can you do that, Phil?
Yes, you can.
How do you do that?
It really comes down to soil prep and picking the right crops to grow.
Right.
And I've done a lot of trial and error over the last 4 years with Larry here, trying to learn how to turn my little plot of land into something that can actually grow some food.
So you've got a little backyard urban farm with chickens.
Yes.
And
I have 3 chickens. I have a duck that waddles around my garden and helps me with critters.
Great.
And I also am growing in the front yard as well. We took out all the grass and we're growing in the front yard.
That's true, you are.
That's right.
And this, one of the first things I want to show off is get Phil, if you'll get your big squash. I'm a real believer in growing storable foods, and this is my favorite storable squash, and Phil grew a really good one this year. This one is called a golden cushaw, and it will, in storage now, go from green. You can see it's starting to turn yellow. It's edible now, but it will get better and better and better as the winter goes on. And by spring, when you really have no vegetables at all growing, or you're waiting to get things out of the garden, boy, it's really nice to have some of these squash around.
This was the largest of the ones that I grew. This particular gourd is growing in, or squash is growing in at about 40 pounds.
Yeah.
We weighed it yesterday. I have probably another 60 to 75 pounds in smaller squash that I grew.
Okay.
And it was a mix of trying a very short season, a 90-day, as well as this one here was probably about 110. 100 to 110.
Yeah.
That's correct. This is a large squash.
Right.
You'd have to either cut this after it ripens more, either cut and freeze. I think I'm going to try cutting, drying.
Right, drying is what I think is going to be the answer.
Or just sharing with your neighbors.
Right, of course. I can show you some 90-day pumpkins here and squash. This first one is one called Neon. And there's Neon, there's Racer, there's 2 or 3 that are true 85 to 90 day. They're actually Peppos, not Maximus. So they're not true pumpkins, but they look like a pumpkin, they taste like a pumpkin. You'll think they're a pumpkin, but they're really related to the zucchini. But that's that one there. And this one would be considered a pretty large one. Most of them you're going to get would be probably quite a bit smaller. Now, this was grown in some friends of mine up in Fence Lake, which is a higher altitude even, and they have a harder time growing, but they had a lot more manure this year, so they got a little bit bigger pumpkin. So
So I grew 4 of these in my front yard. Horrible dirt, horrible soil, and that was a 90-day thing. Mine was probably about 3/4 the size of this.
Right. You can save the seed from that one. I've done it, and I get back a good pumpkin. This one is a little over a year old, and it still is just now failing. So for even just plain old garage long-term storage, that one will work. And it's just now failing, so it's got a hole in it now. So that one could have been used before. This is called a Turkish honey pumpkin, and I'm going to say it too is about 100 days. But we can start these like you would tomatoes about 10 or 15 days before we're ready to plant, well 20 days before we're ready to plant. And so we'll have a nice little transplant to put in the garden. We'll make this easy in 90 days that way. And it'll after ripen. All of the pumpkins and all tend to get better if they're after ripened anyway, by cutting the stems, leaving a little longer stem, and that dries off and kind of keeps moisture from getting out of the pumpkin, and go. But the value of these can be demonstrated this way. And we're going to show you a lot closer view of all of these, but this is dried zucchini, and you can do this with any squash, and this zucchini is at least 2 years old and tastes just as fresh as it did when I dried it.
Can I ask on storage, how did you store your pumpkins for the length?
You know, I put them in the garage in the dark, and they went through some pretty hot weather. That's why they didn't store. This one, the Turkish one, literally was on the front porch in the sun, and I was just amazed. It just sat there and it looked good. It's just hard as it can be, and and it's blemish free, so I know it's in pretty good shape. So we're going to talk about a lot of the things which we've discovered in growing for that 90 day. Now obviously in 90 days you have the root crops that you can make in 90 days, like turnips and a radish, and there are even some little carrots that you might be able to make in that time, but they will also grow on into the colder times. So starting in June with that second garden, maybe last of June, would you say, when the rains first started here?
So I planted my front yard at the first week of July.
First week of July.
Yes.
And you got this beast, and
actually that one came from the backyard, but the largest one coming from the front yard was probably about a 20-pounder.
Okay.
About half that size.
Well, okay. Now a year ago I grew them to see whether I could get 200 pounds of squash, which would get me through the year if I had to have it, if it was the worst time ever. And I could do that just in a pretty small plot. They're a vine that gets about 20 foot long. So we're going to draw an end to this now and come back with another one here so that you can take a break and come back. We're going to talk about drying a lot of the vegetables, and we're going to talk about some of the beans and corns that we've discovered grew very well in that 90-day period, can be planted and harvested within that 90-day period after July 1st, here in Albuquerque anyway, with a little bit of rain. It really does assist gardening. Right. Now, for those of you who are out of the country, we have some listeners I know that are from Serbia and some from Russia that have written in and talked to us a little bit. The 90-day beans would do just as well in that area. These seem to be able to grow pretty much anywhere. I'm growing them in Africa very successfully. So if they'll grow in short season or in short day, then they'll grow most anywhere. So we'll draw this to a close right now. Thanks for listening in. 90-day gardening is fun, and we feel like the most important element in finishing out a storage garden. So thank you for listening.